My name is Sean Carlton, and I'm a PhD student in the Frost Centre for Canadian Studies and Indigenous Studies at Trent University in Peterborough, Ontario, Anishinaabe Territory. And I'm going to be reading pages 297 and 298 of Honoring the Truth, Reconciling for the Future, summary of the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. This is for Patrick. Role of Canada's museums and archives in education for reconciliation. Museums and archives, as sites of public memory and national history, have a key role to play in national reconciliation. As publicly funded institutions, museums and archives in settler colonial states such as Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the United States have interpreted the past in ways that have excluded or marginalized Aboriginal peoples' cultural perspectives and historical experience. Museums have traditionally been thought of as places where a nation's history is presented in neutral, objective terms. Yet, as history that had formerly been silenced was revealed, it became evident that Canada's museums had told only part of the story. In a similar vein, archives have been part of the architecture of imperialism, institutions that held the historical documents of the state. As Canada confronts its settler colonial past, museums and archives have been gradually transforming from institutions of colony and empire into more inclusive institutions that better reflect the full richness of Canadian history. Political and legal developments on international and national fronts have contributed to this change. Around the globe, the adoption of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples has resulted in the growing recognition that Indigenous peoples have the right to be self-determining peoples, and that the state has a duty to protect Indigenous traditional knowledge and cultural rights. The Declaration has also established that actions by the state that affect Indigenous peoples require their free, prior, and informed consent. States have an obligation to take effective measures to protect the rights of Indigenous peoples, or to make reparations where traditional knowledge or cultural rights have been violated. This has significant implications for national museums and archives and the public servants who work in them. The Commission emphasizes that several articles under the United Nations Declaration have particular relevance for national museums and archives in Canada, and these include: Indigenous peoples have the right to practice and revitalize their cultural traditions and customs. This includes the right to maintain, protect, and develop the past, present, and future manifestations of their cultures, such as archaeological and historical sites, artifacts, designs, ceremonies, and technologies, as well as visual and performing arts and literature. States shall provide redress through effective mechanisms which may include restitution, developed in conjunction with Indigenous peoples, with respect to their cultural, intellectual, religious, and spiritual property taken without their free, prior, and informed consent, or in violation of their laws, traditions, and customs. Indigenous peoples have the right to manifest, practice, develop, and teach their spiritual and religious traditions, customs, and ceremonies, the right to maintain, protect, and have access in privacy to their religious and cultural sites, and the right to use and control their ceremonial objects, and the right to the reparation of their human remains. States shall seek to enable the access and or reparation of cultural and ceremonial objects and human remains in their possession through fair, transparent, and effective mechanisms developed in conjunction with Indigenous peoples concerned. The Declaration, in conjunction with Section 35 of Canada's Constitution Act, 1982, which recognizes and affirms existing Aboriginal and treaty rights, and the various court rulings related to Aboriginal rights, have fundamentally altered the landscape in Canada's public history institutions. In light of court decisions that have declared that the principle of the honor of the Crown must be upheld by the state in all its dealings with Aboriginal peoples, and that Aboriginal peoples' oral history must be placed on an equal footing with written historical documents, national museums and archives have been compelled to respond accordingly. The governance structures, policy, ethical codes, and daily operations of national museums and archives have had to adapt to accommodate the constitutional and legal realities of Canada's changing relationship with Aboriginal peoples. Thank you.